What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video I'm going to be going through a player versus player breakdown. So in this type of video, I compare three guys at the same position that are going very close together in your fantasy football drafts. I'm going to break down each player individually and then talk about which player I would prefer at the end of the video. So this specific video, we're looking at the wide receiver position, and we're going to be comparing CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and Ja'Marr Chase. It is very possible that these are the first three wide receivers off the board in your fantasy football drafts. It's possible they're going pick 2, 3, and 4. So if you have an early pick, you definitely could be choosing between these three wide receivers. And let's start off by looking at their current ADP. So we have 4 different platforms here: Underdog, Sleeper, ESPN, Yahoo, and then their consensus ADP from those 4 platforms. So actually, kind of interestingly, these guys are pretty locked in on each platform. CeeDee Lamb is the wide receiver 1, Tyreek Hill, the wide receiver 2, and then Ja'Marr Chase on most platforms, most consistently, is going to be the wide receiver 3. You might get a Justin Jefferson pick, on certain spots, but Ja'Marr Chase, more often than not, is going to be picked as the wide receiver 3. And while there is some consensus on these 4 platforms, it doesn't mean that every draft is going to look like that, and it also doesn't mean that it's going to end up being the right pick. So we're going to start off by looking at the guy who's most consistently going as the wide receiver 1, CeeDee Lamb, and he's a player who has made pretty solid leaps after every one of his NFL seasons. Came in as a rookie, averaged 13.6 points per game, jumped that up to 14.6 in year 2, up to 17.7 in year 3, and then had by far his best fantasy season last year, 23.7 PPR points per game. That's wide receiver 33 to wide receiver 18 to wide receiver 7, and then all the way up to wide receiver 1 last year. He was number 1 in targets, receptions, touchdowns, yak, red zone targets, and fantasy points per game last year. He was number 2 in receiving yards, and then number 4 in target rate. So pretty much across the board, CeeDee Lamb just had an insane 2023 season, both from a real-life NFL perspective and then also fantasy-wise. The Cowboys led the NFL in pass attempts per game. They also led the NFL in points per game, and then they were 3rd in total passing yards. So it was a great environment offensively for CeeDee Lamb to come in and produce, and it's a very similar situation heading into 2024. You have Dak at quarterback. You have another year of pretty limited weapons outside of CeeDee Lamb. Like, you have Lamb as the number 1, Cooks as the number 2, who didn't do anything crazy last year, and then you have Jake Ferguson, who's going to be relevant as like a tight end option. But CeeDee Lamb is just by far and away the top weapon in this offense, so someone who I think is set up to have a really impressive 2024. Now, looking at Tyreek Hill, he has put together 2 very impressive seasons with the Dolphins. In his first year with the Dolphins, 2022, he averaged 20.4 PPR points per game, was the wide receiver 3 in points per game. 2023 averaged 23.5 points per game and was the wide receiver 2, finished just behind CeeDee Lamb. I mean, in different years, like, either of those seasons could have been wide receiver 1 overall. They were very, very close together, but he was 0.2 points per game off of CeeDee Lamb. Tyreek Hill is coming off of career highs in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. For how impressive his career has been, the fact that he's just now setting, those records, definitely a good look for Tyreek Hill here in 2024. Last year, he was number 1 in target rate, target share, receiving yards, yards per route run, yards per team pass attempt, and then he was also 2nd in receptions and air yard share. Just like CeeDee Lamb, also a very similar offensive situation. 2 at quarterback, Jalen Waddle is the wide receiver 2. You don't have any, crazy coaching shakeups. So Tyreek Hill, once again, should be the focal point of this offense. I think there's really only one potential concern here for Tyreek Hill, and that would be his age. He's going to be 30 years old this season. It certainly does not look like he's slowing down. He, hasn't shown any signs of aging, that, his athleticism is falling off or he's becoming more injury prone. But for someone who does rely so much on having that elite speed, I think it's at least a minor concern. Once again, not saying Tyreek Hill is going to fall off a cliff or that he's going to have a bad season or anything, but it's just one potential concern that is not there for a guy like CeeDee Lamb or for a guy like Ja'Marr Chase, who we're going to talk about next. And I think to some, Ja'Marr Chase may seem like the clear 3rd option, but I truly do believe that Ja'Marr Chase has the upside to be the wide receiver 1 overall. Last season, there's no way around it. He was a bust for fantasy with where you drafted him. You were expecting him to be competing with, the Justin Jeffersons, the Tyreek Hills, the CeeDee Lambs, and that did not happen. He was the wide receiver 11 in points per game, averaged 16.4 points per game. It's not a terrible season, but compared to what you were expecting, like a 20 plus, point per game ceiling, he definitely did not come through. I think the thing we have to just acknowledge here is that it really was not Ja'Marr Chase's fault. Burrow was playing injured early on. The offense was not great. He comes back. The offense starts to get rolling, or, he gets healthy. And then Burrow suffers a season-ending injury. So he just didn't get that elite quarterback play that we were anticipating, him being paired with Joe Burrow. The Bengals were 12th in passing yards, 13th in passing touchdowns. You compare that to 2022, where they were 6th in passing yards, 2nd in passing touchdowns. Definitely a very different offensive environment. And without those injuries to Joe Burrow, it looked like Ja'Marr Chase was poised for a monster 2023. We look at how he was pacing early on in his career. He averaged 17.9 points per game as a rookie. That is absurd production for a rookie wide receiver. Then in year 2, he got above the 20 point per game mark, was at 20.2. So it seemed like heading into year 3, he was set up to just absolutely dominate, talking 22, 23 plus points per game. And in my opinion, I feel like that elite ceiling season has kind of just been delayed. I don't think him struggling last year, being disappointing, I don't think that's something that's going to continue moving forward. I think he just got unlucky in the injury department with his quarterback. You could make the same case where if Dak went down, Tua went down, those other guys weren't going to be putting up the same production that we saw last year. So now looking at which wide receiver I would take if I'm on the clock, pick 2, pick 3, wherever you are, and I'm choosing between CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, and Ja'Marr Chase. Who am I looking at? Now, if you told me heading into the 2024 season that CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill were the exact same players we saw from last year, it would pretty much be a total toss-up. You could give me CeeDee Lamb, you could give me Tyreek Hill. I don't think there would have been a massive difference. But I did mention, the one red flag for Tyreek Hill is the age, and that's why I just give the slight edge to CeeDee Lamb. It's just a concern that is not there for a guy like Lamb at his age. So if I'm taking, the first wide receiver off the board, I would want it to be CeeDee Lamb, and then I have Tyreek Hill right below him. And even though I do think Ja'Marr Chase can hit that 23 plus point per game season, I just have a tough time picking him over guys who literally just proved they could do it last season and then are also in very similar situations. So even though I do think Ja'Marr Chase can get there, I just can't rationalize picking him over Lamb, who just did it, Tyreek Hill, who just did it, and have the same quarterbacks, very similar offenses. So right now, I have CMC locked in as my consensus, 101 overall. Pretty much every league format, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey as my number 1 pick. And then number 2, I'm taking CeeDee Lamb. That's just where I'm at this point. Tyreek Hill right now is my 103, and then Ja'Marr Chase is my 105. I have Breece Hall at the 104. So they are going fairly close together. If you wanted to take Tyreek Hill over CeeDee Lamb, I don't think that's crazy. Lamb went from 17 points per game all the way up to 23. Maybe you think he's going to fall off a little bit. Tyreek Hill has given you multiple 20-plus point per game seasons. You could make the case for Tyreek Hill. I just slightly prefer CeeDee Lamb, but Tyreek Hill, obviously a great fantasy option. And I think the same thing with Ja'Marr Chase. If Ja'Marr Chase is starting to slip to pick 6, pick 7, because people are worried about him kind of flopping last year, I am totally willing to buy that dip. And like I said, I would not be shocked if Ja'Marr Chase ended up being the wide receiver 1 this season. Joe Burrow has a massive year in MVP contention. Ja'Marr Chase is going to be absolutely killing it for fantasy. So those are my thoughts. I would go CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Ja'Marr Chase. Let me know if you guys agree with me down below. Who are you taking as the wide receiver 1? Would love to hear it. Also, let me know if you guys do enjoy this style of video. I think it's kind of fun. I think it can be helpful if you're on the clock. This is definitely a decision you guys could be making. But that's going to wrap it up. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.